this episode of the Growth Catalyst podcast, I meet with Paul Paddock, who is the CEO of Post Office Insurance. He shares his leadership journey, which has been anything but conventional. He started his commercial journey in a call centre and he worked his way up through that business, eventually running it. When he joined the Post Office Insurance, he led the travel insurance sector and eventually stepped into the CEO role in 2025. We explore his leadership style. He's had to evolve from being a commercially focused leader to putting people, customers, and culture at the heart of what he's doing. And he shares why a psychological, safe, high-trust environment is utterly essential. He talks candidly about stepping into the CEO role during a significant period of change, including rapid growth, change of team, reshaping an operating model, and all while building a distinct culture, breaking away from the constraints of being part of the wider post office group. He shares some practical insights on leading through transformation, hiring for values, behaviours, and creating clarity around priorities and trying to avoid the trap of making sweeping decisions too soon, too early. We dig into hybrid working and rebuilding connection in a post-COVID world, including how setting shared office days and creating space for informal collaboration helps teams reconnect. It's a very grounded, practical episode. It's going to help those leaders that are navigating change, scale, complexity, and a reminder that culture isn't soft, it is foundational. I hope you enjoy this episode. So in this episode of the Growth Catalyst podcast, I'm joined by Paul Paddock, who is the CEO of Post Office Insurance. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Collette, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thanks so much for taking time out to talk with us today.
No, you're very welcome. I'm really excited to have the conversation.
I'm really looking forward to sort of getting stuck into this. So we're obviously talking to a lot of CEOs and experts around culture. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. Before we get there, could you give our listeners an introduction of yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've got a bit of a potted history in terms of how I ended up as the CEO of an insurance business. And if I go right back to kind of my early career, I was actually an apprentice electrician. And the story I used to tell lots of people was that the firm I was working for as I was going through my apprenticeship went bust, so I had to find a job. Now that I'm a bit more senior and I've got 20 years of experience under my belt, I can probably be a bit more truthful around that. And the honest answer is I was fired because I couldn't get out of bed. And I remember having a conversation with my parents at the time, and they were like, right, you need to find a job. Like, you're not going to be able to just stay at home and you think we're going to pay for you. So I was like, fair enough. So I applied for a role in a call centre at a company called Holiday Extras, and I was successful in getting that. And over a 10-year period, went from kind of answering their phones to running their insurance business. And then sort of 8 years ago, made the move into post office to look after their travel insurance business, which was primarily my background. And then over the kind of last 8 years have kind of taken on more and more of the commercial responsibility of that business, adding different product lines to my portfolio until around last May, they appointed me as interim CEO with a view of that becoming permanent in May of 2026. So yeah, a bit of an odd way in how to get into this industry. It was kind of, it found me rather than me finding it, but was probably the best decision I ever made, not getting out of bed at 17 years of old to go off and do my electrician's work. So yeah, funny how we get here in the end.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks for being so honest. That's that's quite an interesting journey. I think most careers are squiggly, right? I think we all sort of begin at the beginning and we think it's just going to be a direct line into wherever our ambitions are, but it's just never that straightforward. It's always fascinating.
No, and actually, if you ever spoke to my wife, she's always been very keen, especially when we were a lot younger. We've got children now, so it's not really an option, but she was always very keen that we kind of took a year out and travelled. And every time we kind of got to that opportunity, we were like, right, we're going to go and do this. I then got promoted or whatever. So I was actually maybe we should hang back and just let's get some more experience. And yeah, that thing has never happened. So hopefully we can explore that in the latter part of our life, and I can let her do those things rather than where she supported me so well throughout my career.
Yeah, amazing. So, so what would you say that your area of expertise is these days?
That's a really interesting question. So I think if I was to really reflect on that, I think I'm pretty commercial. So I'm very good at looking at businesses and understanding where are the areas that can be improved without having to make massive transformational change. How can I just fix the basics to get people kind of focused on the right things? I work very heavily on relationships. So I am a really kind of inclusive, approachable person. I don't expect people to kind of stand on attention because the CEO's entered into the building, or always listen to the things that I've got to say. I think we hire people who are brilliant at what they do. It is my job to listen to them and make sure that we are getting the best from them, and we're giving them the tools and the capability to make their job as easy as possible. So I think if you were to ask me 5 years ago, I would have told you I was ruthlessly commercial, and that actually my ambition was to take down all of my competitors around me, and that's kind of what I was put on the planet for. Now, when people ask me that question, my response is to create a great culture for people to do their best work, to really look after our customers, because ultimately we run an insurance business and people typically interact with us when something has gone wrong, and to ensure that we are operating in a commercially viable way. We are still a commercial organization. We still are here to make money for the shareholder, but there is a more balanced way to do that, rather than just ruthlessly going after the best deal from an insurer. Actually, my experience lends me that the more we create those truly strategic, value additive partnerships with our third parties, we get a hell of a lot more done. And the appetite for people to work with us is much more there than when we're fighting over a 10 pence on a cost line, for example.
How did you learn to do that, to be a leader that listens? I'm just thinking about your journey that you just explained. So sort of 10 years in a call center. So I guess you're listening to customers. That seemed like an obvious starting point. And then you got commercial, very commercial. Again, I can resonate with that. I had a very similar journey. And, it's all about the commerciality of things. But now you're saying actually you've kind of flicked a switch and you're really focused in on the people as a leader and your customers. How have you learned to sort of focus on that?
I haven't really ever thought about it. And actually, I think the overwhelming thought that pops into my head when you ask me that question is probably becoming a father, and actually listening to what my children are telling me and making sure that I am showing up to be the best version of a father to those. And actually, there's lots of learnings and synergies actually that I think I play into how I operate with my team. And I'm not saying it's a parent-child relationship by any stretch of the imagination, but actually, I think I much more favor the carrot over the stick in terms of how we get the best out of people. And I think I very much treat people how I expect to be treated. So I know I work best when I feel listened to, I feel valued. And I've had some amazing bosses and I've had some not so amazing bosses. So I will pick up on the things that I really enjoyed and what got the kind of me working in the right way, and have tried to adapt that into how I approach my kind of career and how I work with my team. Because I think it's really important. And actually, it's if we get the culture bit wrong and we get that bit around how our people feel when interacting with the leadership team or the business as a whole wrong, we will fail. It is as simple as that. You can have the best products, you can have the best pricing structure, you can have the best strategy, but if you've got a team of people who are completely disengaged and feel overworked and burnt out, we're completely stuck. So actually, I think it's come from a lot from experience. I think it's come from just how my life personally has evolved, kind of getting married, becoming a father, and just understanding kind of how those relationships are really important. And I think making sure that you kind of build that into your day-to-day working life is a really important point. I think I've met leaders that will walk around the office that won't look people in the eye and not talk to their team. And I see how that makes people feel. I see the anxiety that kind of creates when they do end up having to talk to those people. And then I've seen leaders particularly in my early part of my career within holiday extras, the group CEO used to walk the floor on a Friday morning. There was over 1,000 people in that organization, but every Friday morning he'd walk around and he'd talk to you. And he wasn't asking what you were working on. He wasn't asking around what's the key thing that we should be looking at as part of the business. He wanted to know about you. He'd ask about your family or your hobbies. And I think it really put people at ease, so that when they did have something that they needed to raise or they had an idea, people felt really comfortable. And I really want to recreate that culture and environment within our business, because I think that's when you get those real silver bullets that can really transform what you're doing.
Yeah. That's lovely. So your passion comes through about being that sort of leader, and lots of these conversations that the people that are the leaders that are successful are those that allow themselves to be human, right? Really acknowledge that human behavior and treat others accordingly. That's lovely to hear.
Yeah. And I don't know everything, right? I'm not always right. And I think it's really important as leaders that we accept that we aren't perfect. And there will be times where I am wrong. And I need people to feel really confident and safe that they can challenge me if I'm wrong. Because if you've got this very belligerent style that we're just going to go in the direction that I've set because I know I'm right, again, you're going to end up in cul-de-sacs pretty fast. So I think it's really important that as leaders, we really understand where our kind of weak points are, where we then feel those people around us who can help support and give you that balance. Because no one is ever the finished article and nobody knows everything. So it's important that we get that balance right.
Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely true. So yeah, recognizing, and I'm very focused when I work with leadership teams on strengths based focus. So actually just understanding what you're good at, what your team's good at as a collective, and just starting from that point. So it's just so logical, right? If we spend our time trying to fix our weaknesses, the want to actually go to work just decline quite quickly.
Yeah. I think I had a boss really early on in my career who gave me two very good pieces of advice that have stuck with me for the last 20 years or so. The first one was, I used to get into a habit very early on of presenting ideas in a really complex way. And he said, stop trying to convince me you're intelligent. I know you're good at what you do. That's why I've hired you. Actually, how you add value to me is presenting what is quite a complicated subject in a really simple way so that I can make a decision. So, and that really hit me. And I was like, right, okay. And that changed the way that I would work and operate. And the second thing that he said to me that really landed was, stop wasting time trying to develop the things that you're just not naturally very good at. Go and find people to support you in those things and double down the things that you're excellent at, because that is how you'll add the most value. And actually it was really good advice, and it's stuck with me for a really long time. And it's advice that I now impart in my team, so that again, people are focusing on the right things rather than getting stressed and anxious about, oh, I must get really good at this thing. And again, kind of comes back to that earlier point. Nobody is that kind of fully rounded individual. So it's kind of acknowledging that stuff really early, and then understanding how that's going to change the way that you work and who you work with. I think it's really important.
So how are you, you've obviously given us some indication about the type of culture that you are building there. So you're going through a transformation. We'll sort of dig into that a little bit more in a moment. But what's your ambition and approach for what the culture will be or is at Post Office Insurance?
So I think there's no secret that the post office as a whole has been through some difficult times over the last few years. And that has resulted in some fairly significant leadership changes within the group, etc. We're all for the kind of right reasons, etc. I think the insurance business is a subsidiary of the group. And actually, I think we mentioned it previously that the insurance business is a digitally led commercial organization the group is very much a retail-based business around providing services to those most needy in society so that they have access to cash, they've got somewhere they can pay their bill. So in terms of the requirements of the people, they're quite different. And actually, you need to have people within the group who are very socially conscious and are kind of driving that kind of retail mindset. But within the business that I look after, we need a very different set of skills. So I think it's making sure that we have gone through that journey. We've sort of doubled our headcount in the last 12 months from, okay, we need to move away from essentially feeling like a department within the wider business to taking that control and ensuring that we can trade and distribute in the way that we want to do that with the right sets of skills and behaviors that we expect. We've got the commercial team locked in, working with our partners in a really strategic way. We've got our data platforms doing the things that we need to do. And I think to bring that back to culture, we've been very fortunate that the parent has been very receptive to us kind of going away and looking at building that team to drive that. I think we want to find our own office location so that we can breed that culture internally for an insurance business and kind of create a little bit of that separation whilst still very much feeling part of the wider machine that is the post office. And then I think it's important that we as a leadership team set those expectations really early on, and that it is about kind of showing up for one another. We're still quite a small team, so it's still quite busy and it's quite frenetic, and we're not that big corporate that you may see in other industries or in other businesses. So those behaviours are slightly different. I think I want colleagues to show up for one another. I want us to feel, as corny as it sounds, a bit like a family. I think one of the things that I've reflected on the most since particularly COVID is I've seen a team that were super close. We were together a lot. We knew lots about one another, to a kind of a post-COVID world where it's become quite formal. So the only time that you interact in this kind of virtual world with your colleagues now is via a Teams call, which is a set time, it's with a specific thing that you need to talk about. So you don't really take that time to get to know one another. And if you have an issue that you need to solve, it gets solved in a really formal way, which can create a bit of a barrier. Whereas if I think about how I would have solved some of those things 5 years ago, I would have gone and had a chat with the person who I knew could help me unlock the thing that I needed unblocking. And I could do that because I knew who he was, a bit more about him. We had that kind of mutual connection that we could pull upon. And I think we've lost that a bit. And I'm very keen that we kind of reinstill that. And I think it leads me on quite nicely. We did a all hands call a few months back, and one of the team asked me, what's the thing that keeps me up most at night? And actually my honest response was, I have an amazing team. I've got a very clear plan. We've got a very clear growth trajectory that I'm completely behind and believe we can deliver. We've got a very supportive shareholder. We've got a great kind of board structure. The thing that worries me is that I've got a team of people who don't know each other. So don't know how to build and form those relationships to help us achieve our goals. Because by having those relationships, you get that things done much faster in a much more collaborative way, rather than it feeling like this just machine that's trying to move through days, weeks, months. It's not the culture we want. I want people to feel part of something and to be proud of what they're doing.
So that's really interesting. So I was chatting with a CEO, and he tried to do a return to office type event. Didn't go very well. NPS scores sort of plateaued, or actually plummeted. And he's working his way through, how do you build those connections when everyone's dialing in from across the world, and really trying to make these relationships develop. So what tips would you give people that are really struggling with that?
Yeah, it is. We haven't cracked it by any sense of the word. It is a really difficult and thorny issue, actually, kind of how you get that engagement back in the workplace. I think it is particularly difficult for international teams. I'm quite glad I haven't got that problem that I'm trying to solve. I think what we've done within Post Office Insurance is that we've been very clear that we expect people to come in on the same day. And actually, rather than saying, right, come back to the office 40% and you pick, because you end up in the same problem. If you've got half the people in, half the people out, actually trying to do that collaborative working becomes even more difficult, because then you've got to make sure you have a meeting room with the right technology, and actually there's more planning and more kind of stress that comes trying to make those good conversations happen. So we very early on said, right, these are the days. We want you here on these days. And then we put a bit of the responsibility back on the team. And I said, I do not expect people to sit there and tell me that they're sat on Teams calls all day on the days that you're in the office, because you have a responsibility to manage your diary and make the best out of that time. I want you to be with your colleagues. I want you in having those kind of green shoot conversations that take you off on all sorts of different tangents, and some great ideas come off the back of that. So it's a bit of, we're going to set out the structure. We're going to have a degree of flexibility around what we define as core office hours. But outside of that, we really want you to use this time to connect with the team. So we make sure that our all hands calls and all those sorts of forums are held on those days. So actually we can bring the whole team together in person. We make sure that there's a degree of kind of social that we can do on those days as well. So we make sure that we have a summer social and a Christmas social at the very minimum, and then kind of encourage the team to go out where they want to and just, again, reconnect with their colleagues. It's really important that people don't feel like they're just being dragged back into the workplace just to be there. It's really important that they see the value from it. And I think we need to be really careful to get that balance. So that you give people, because people have changed, working patterns has changed, the world has changed in how people want to operate. So it's important that we give the balance so that they can do all of that. If you've got a paper to write or some data to crunch, you want that quiet time, but then give yourself that time when you're all together to just explore issues and talk to one another. I really can't stress enough the power of understanding who you're working with and building those relationships. It's such a core driver for me on how I think we can be the most effective team possible.
Yeah. And that sounds like that's how you've kind of built your professional career as well. You're a relationship builder. And then you talked about, as a leader, it's not a parent-child, but it sounds like familial. You know, you are building family, which probably sounds a bit corny, but those relationships have to be built, have to be deep, have to understand each other, and you're trying to bring that together in person as much as possible. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, it's about being really authentic. I don't, just because I'm the CEO, doesn't mean I need to walk around in a really pompous way and to change who I am. I like to talk about the football with some of the guys over the weekend. I like to have a bit of healthy competition around the training number. I still want to be that person. I don't, just because I'm in a certain position doesn't mean that I should change who I am. And I think sometimes people fall into this trap, and I certainly did early in my career. I kind of got promoted and I felt I must behave in a different way, especially when I was dealing with the market or with external people. I'd kind of put on this persona of this posh, privately educated, because I felt that's what I needed to be. And actually the people kind of knew me, were like, what are you doing? Like, you've got here because of who you are. Like, don't lose that. And I think that's a really important thing to hold on to as you kind of work through that stuff. Otherwise, if people think you're not being genuine, they don't believe you. And if they don't believe you, they won't follow you. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, trust, absolutely trust. And I was talking again with someone recently about this transition. So when you go in and take the CEO role, or any promotion or any evolution inside of your career, there's a transition period. So you are exiting something that you're really comfortable, confident, that's who you are, but you've been promoted, or you're taking a new step into a new role because you're an expert here. And then there's this sort of messy middle wilderness bit where you don't know what you're doing on the the new role quite yet, because you're not doing it yet, but you're saying goodbye to the old role. And that piece in the middle, that wilderness, I'm kind of calling it, it's quite hard to navigate. And I think you're right. You see people lose themselves all the time because they feel like they have to show up and have all the answers of something they're not even doing yet.
Yeah, no, I could. It's quite uncomfortable at times, actually. I think people instinctively people want to fall back into the things that they're really comfortable doing. So I think sometimes you kind of spot that, and you have to kind of just politely remind them, look, no, this is where you now need to focusing your time. This is where you're going to add the most value. And I think we've also got to be really aware of, you can't just hire people to be great leaders because they're great at what they do. It's a really different set of skills. And I think it's making sure that when you're going through that recruitment process, or you're kind of promoting within, you're not looking at them and going, right, you're fantastic at trading, because actually moving from that trading perspective to leading that commercial function is completely different. You could not get a bigger step actually in terms of, and the thing I found going through my career was going from that kind of, I call it kind of doing roles, and I don't mean that in a kind of disingenuous way, but you're at the coal face, you're doing the trading, you're working with all the partners, to that kind of step up, and now you're having to lead the people who are doing those things that you were once very good at, can be really disconcerting, because I found it was the biggest challenge for me, from kind of moving away from that day to day, I'm just going to get on and make stuff happen, to kind of leading through people. And it took me quite a long time to really get to grips with that, because it was to your point, it was really uncomfortable.
Yeah. I can, I can completely resonate. So actually, when you were offered and you were talking about taking the CEO, because I know you were kind of the deputy CEO
Yes.
for some time, so you're reasonably familiar with what the role has requires.
Yes.
What did you do when you sort of stepped into this CEO role? How did you know what to do next? Who did you turn to? What advice would you give people that are just kind of stepping into that now?
Well, so I think I remember when I got the call, and I think I went for a walk straight after, just to kind of really collect my thoughts in terms of, okay, what does this mean? And what I always like to take a minute, sit back and reflect, and just write down what are the 3 or 4 really big things I need to get right really early on. And then what I would typically do is go and reach out to my network. So people who I have respected for a really long time, mentors that have helped me on my journey, have always been really good sounding boards for me. And then outside of that, I am very fortunate. We have, within the insurance business, we've got a set of non-exec directors who are also very experienced and have got heaps of time that they're prepared to offer to kind of help us get to where we need to. So I think when this particular opportunity came around, we were going through quite a period of change. So kind of being asked to step up into a CEO role in any business is a big step, but we were going through we're kind of moving into a slightly different strategic direction with the business and the shareholder. We were needing to recruit sort of double the headcount of what we have today. We still needed to trade. We didn't quite yet have the backfill of the commercial director, so there was an expectation that would still need to be covered in the interim. So there was a huge amount to do, and it was at some points, it was very chaotic. But I think the thing that I just kept referring back to was, these are the 4 things I have to get right this year. And actually, if we get these 4 things right and we build the foundations for the organization, it will set it up to succeed. And there will be challenges along the way, and we'll have to make some tough calls along the way, so that we can not get distracted and we can focus on getting those kind of foundational elements of what we're doing really in place. So I think, to answer the question, I've got some really good people around me, which I lean on. I've got some very good non-exec directors who are very supportive. And the way I'm naturally wired is to really reflect on things. I'm not an instinctive decision maker. I don't need weeks and weeks and time, but I would like to reflect on things. If I'm not sure, I'm very comfortable saying to people, I'm going to take an hour. I'm going to go away, I'm going to think about this. And I will think about it, and then I will be very clear on what are the ruthless priorities that we have to follow. And that's what I'll stick to. I won't let myself go off and get distracted by lots of new and shiny things along the way that can disrupt us from the core principles, which was setting the business up in the right way.
And I mean, that's great, because I think that's a common mistake that people make. How do you know what to focus on? I was reading recently about system 1 brain and system 2 brain. And system 1 is your instinct. Actually, I believe this is true. I know this is true, so I'm just going to go with that. And actually, it's not always true. You need that methodology and that way of just stepping back and taking that time. So you've pulled it apart. You've turned to your network, your community. You've got your NEDs that are there helping. So how did you just know how to diagnose what to focus on?
So I'm very fortunate that I've been in the business for quite a long time, so it wasn't new. So I knew what we were doing, and the strategy that we pulled together, I had pulled together. So it was my plan. It was working with the wider exec. So in terms of stepping in, I kind of knew the component parts that needed to be done. So I had the luxury on this particular opportunity that I wasn't going into anything blind. And I think that the biggest thing that I just had to focus on was what were the things I wasn't doing, because that was being covered by the previous CEO, that I now need to do, and how do I make sure that I get that right really early on? And of those things, where are the bits that I know I'm going to struggle with, because they're not naturally things that I tend to do? And I think it was understanding what that looks like, and then being really transparent with the board around, okay, these things I can do straight away. These things are going to take me some time, and we're going to need some support, and we're going to need to put some development around that, and we'll get there. But there's going to be 6 months where we're going to have to just find our feet with this. So I think it's really around being really transparent. I think people get into this, okay, I've got the job now, so I have to be perfect, and I can't show that vulnerability, and I can't be really open. And actually that creates stress and creates an expectation that just is wrong. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to anybody stepping into any new role is be really honest. People don't want you to fail. They've given you the job because they think you're going to be really good at it. But we have to be really honest with one another so we can support each other in the right way. And I will always do that. I will never sit there and tell you I can do something that I can't. I will make sure that we focus on the things I can do.
Yeah. And I think you've given some clues in the conversation so far, but obviously the culture piece is huge, and you've developed a strategy. So how are you sort of not connecting the two, but how is your culture underpinning your strategy? Are there any learnings that you could share?
So yes is the answer. So I think firstly, it's making sure that we set out the right behaviours. So there are things that we can do as a leadership team to impart the culture in the right way. And that's firstly being very clear on what our mission is and kind of what are the strategic pillars that underpin that. And then being very clear on how every person within the organization is supporting that mission. So that, again, it comes back to that kind of, how am I contributing? How am I being valued? Because again, if you do not feel valued, you can become disengaged quite quickly. And actually, I also think it's really important then to use that process to be able to put the plan up on the board at an MBR and say, sorry, a monthly business review, and say, these are the things that we are focused on. If you are working on anything that is not on this page, you need to stop it, because it's not driving what it is we're trying to do. So it's making sure that people feel that level of inclusiveness and accountability, and that they are part of the wider machine trying to get to where we're going. And then I think outside of that, it is encouraging us to be much more outward looking. We have been very guilty in the past of being a very inward focused business. So making sure that we engage with our insurers, with our distribution partners, and that we are very lined up on what it is that we are trying to do. Because again, as a broker, essentially, we can have the best plans and the best ideas in the world, but if our insurers are focused on something completely different, or our distribution partners are focused on something very different, there's going to be lots of friction there, because there'll be frustrations on both sides. So it's making sure that the team are encouraged to go and have those conversations really early on, get those planned, agreed, and understand who's going to take ownership of which bits, and how do we support each other to get there. So it for me, it is all about empowering people to get on with what they're great at, get rid of kind of bureaucracy, get rid of blockers, and enable the team to do what they're great at.
Was that hard to do? Because again, I'm making some assumptions, but post office itself, an institution, right? It's a behemoth. It's been through its challenges. You're breaking away, and you're a commercial arm, but you're obviously still kind of you're falling under the umbrella. So there's I guess some of your suppliers will have assumptions about how you operate. Was it the same for the team internally? Was it difficult to get them to? Did they have to change behaviour?
There's a little bit of that, not too much. So we're quite fortunate that we've hired a hell of a lot of new people over the
Okay.
last year, so that we've kind of got that opportunity to really start afresh. In terms of our partners, there are a number of them we're already operating in this way, is making sure that we kind of set that standard across each of them, and having those conversations at a really senior level straight away, so that that message gets cascaded through both organizations, so that everyone is aligned at every level. I think that's really important. And ultimately, what we're aligned on what it is we're trying to achieve, which again is a really important thing. In terms of sort of some of the older, more existing headcount, again, it's ensuring that the comms plan and the reasons as to why we're making those changes and why we're doing the things that we're doing is what's really important. Because again, if people understand it and they're really clear on why this is different and what that means, I think you can get people there much faster. Did we get that perfect straight away? No. Could we have been better with our comms plans? Absolutely. We've learned a lot from this last year. And there are things, if I had my time again, I'd do them differently. But that is, no one gets it right the first time. No one gets everything right all of the time. And it's making sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes, and that we take those learnings, and that when we are communicating what we're doing next, everyone's really clear. And we have those forums where people come back and ask us questions, and you can do that in much smaller groups if people are a bit nervous talking in front of the entire organization. So there are things that we can now put in place based on the experiences that we've had in the last year or so.
That's really interesting. So there's different communication styles for different types of stakeholders. And so as part of the culture, I've kind of picked up on this. So when something hasn't worked, or I wouldn't necessarily use the word failure, that seems a bit harsh. How have you revisited that? How have you identified that it hasn't worked? And how did the rest of the organization know what hasn't worked, why it hasn't worked, and what happens next? And do people feel, sorry, I'm throwing a load of questions at you, do people feel safe in kind of shouting about that or talking about that, raising it?
I'd like to think so. I think if you spoke to the team, I think they would tell you they're pretty open with that kind of stuff. I think my view on failure, or when things don't quite go to plan, is I don't really care how we've got here. Things happen, right? Things will not always go exactly as we expect them to. What I really care about is you raising it really early, and what are we going to do to either correct the issue or change your process or ensure that those things don't happen again. And it is my job to make sure that we have a psychologically safe environment where people aren't hiding things from me. I can't remember where I heard this, but one of a CEO of a multinational insurance company, one of his biggest fears was that he doesn't really understand what's going on in his business, because the message from the ground gets so distorted as it makes its way through the layers, that actually when it gets to him, it's completely changed from what is actually happening. And I'm in a much smaller business with a much smaller team, so the chances of that happening are a lot less. But also I'm very aware of that how I react and the things that I do and the things that my leadership do to kind of correct those set the standard for how people react and behave the next time. So provided it's not negligent, or people are doing the same thing over and over and we know it's wrong, people will always be given an opportunity to kind of be really open and help us fix it and make the change moving forward. Because ultimately we can't grow, we can't deliver our ambitions if we don't get stuff wrong from time to time. That's not how this works. We have to be brave, we have to be bold, and we have to accept the fact that sometimes things go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is challenging for you, because you're growing headcount threefold inside of 12 months.
So it's probably 2.5-fold
Okay.
inside of that time, yeah.
Still significant.
Yeah, it's a big jump, to be fair.
Yeah, and it changes the shape of an organization. And are you finding that communication? I mean, how are you identifying who should, not necessarily who, but that what sort of people should be employed to build the organization that you see over the horizon? And that's tricky, surely.
Yes, yes, it has been. I think it's a careful balance of it's a careful. My view on hiring people is you can teach people almost anything. What you can't do is train behaviors and values are key to people, right? You can't change them. It's the same with any relationship that you have in your life. People are who they are. They might mask it for a period, but actually who they are at their core will always shine through. So for me, going through those processes is making sure that we find people who really fit what we're trying to do. And actually those core values for us are we work hard, we challenge, we're really open to change. We build what we're doing based on relationships, and that we are always very happy to pick up the phone to one another and kind of work together to get round issues. I'm not for a second saying everyone needs to be working from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, because I also don't think that is healthy either. There's a balance to be had. It's about how do we achieve the right outcomes and what does that start to look like? Because to be quite frank, I don't need a team of people who are completely burnt out in 3 months because we've been pushing them too hard. And that's where this thing around kind of that prioritization and making sure that people are focusing on the right stuff becomes really important. But I think we have done a very good job of hiring an exec who kind of share and embody those values and are very positive. I think there is a thing for me to be in our organization. You need to have okay, this isn't a problem, but this is what I'm going to do, rather than this, I can't do that because this thing is in my way. So we've got to have that kind of really forward thinking, positive outlook and seeing challenges as an opportunity to do something a bit different rather than a reason to not do it. And outside of that, all of the technical things can be learned along the way.
Yeah, makes sense. And what are the sort of pressing challenges that your people are facing right now?
So I think we have a fairly challenged home and motor market right now. So I think if you speak to anyone in the industry, they'll kind of reflect on that. So that's causing us a few issues. We are going through quite a lot of change. So we've got a big IT strategy that we're currently reviewing, and that's quite a big thing. That is probably going to take 18 months and touch almost everybody in the organization. So it's really important that we get that right. And you only really get one stab at this because they're expensive projects to kind of manage. So they're probably the two big things that people are really kind of sitting back and going, right, we need to make sure that we do this well, because if we do, it sets us up to really win over the next 5 years. Outside of that, I think actually the rest of the business is kind of running on rails. We've got very clear bottom-up plans around the things that we're looking to do. I think we've now got the capability in the areas that we need. I think people are really bought into how they're contributing and how they can add value to that kind of overall goal. I was commenting to the executive team a couple of weeks back that the place just feels electric. I haven't felt that buzz in the organization for quite some time for reasons that are well understood. But you listen to the conversations that are happening and you listen to the excitement and positive energy around what can be achieved. It's amazing. It makes me quite proud that me and my team have been able to go away and build that, and we'll certainly reap the rewards of that over the next kind of 3 or 5 year horizon.
Yeah, that's amazing. I suppose keeping that momentum and that energy level up is now the task in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's potentially a whole other conversation for a whole other day.
Yeah. Come back to me in 6 months to let you know how it's going.
Yeah, that would be great. So, you're either a business leader, you're a CEO, new CEO, or you've got a mandate for growth, as you have. What are there any quick wins that you could pass on to our listeners that are maybe sat there going, "Well, you've done a huge amount. Where do I start?"
Yeah. So for me, understand the fundamentals of your business. I think everybody, and take time to understand that. I think people fall into the trap too quickly that I need to go and make a name for myself within the first 30 days of me taking a position or whatever that looks like. Things I like to do whenever joining a new team or a new business is just understand it. Okay, how's the business structured? Where's my revenue coming from? Where are my costs allocated to? How does this business operate? Where is it running? And then talk to the existing team. What are your challenges? What are the things that frustrate you? What if you had a magic wand and you could fix one thing tomorrow? What would that be? And really take the time to really listen and kind of really get under the skin of what's going on. And then I think give yourself that time to really reflect on, okay, here are some really short-term things that we can do that will make a difference to people, more importantly, straight away. And here are some things that will make sense commercially that we can do that will just essentially buy time with shareholders or whoever, that will allow you then to go off and deliver the bigger ticket items. Because actually, if you've got this, the kind of the population behind you, and you've got the shareholder behind you because you've delivered some commercial wins so that they can see there's some value being added quite quickly. Once you've taken that time to reflect, you will absolutely get more time to be able to go and deliver that longer term strategy, because people will believe in you much more quicker that way. I think I've seen it happen in the past where people come in and make sweeping decisions quite quickly without really understanding what the unintended consequences of some of those decisions will be. And then they're having to unpick them really quickly. Don't fall into that trap, because actually your credibility weakens really quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Assumption and the misdiagnosis. Yeah. Are there any questions that you would be asking your leadership team, to be asking their teams about what's going on, about cultural direction, or any particular questions?
So I think the questions are normally just the real basic stuff. How are you feeling? Do you understand what it is we're trying to do? Are your team bought into what it is we're trying to do? Is there anything that you haven't got that you feel you should have to be able to deliver on the objectives that we've set you? And is there something that we aren't doing that you expect that we should be doing so that you feel more informed? Because it's really easy for us to ask people lots of questions that are in our minds. I think it's really important to make sure that we flip that back. Is there stuff that we're just missing that we should be thinking about? Because then we can take that feedback in and we can make changes where we need to.
Yeah, great. I've really enjoyed today's chat. Is there something that I should have asked you that you would have liked to have said?
No, I don't think so. I think it's been a really great conversation, actually. I think it's been quite nice just kind of reflecting on the last year and just over my career in general, to be honest. You don't really do that very often. It's not something we naturally kind of get into. But no, I don't think so. I think we've covered the core subject.
Thank you so much for being really honest, candid, and just sharing so much wisdom with our listeners today.
No, thank you very much for having me on.